So I love Purim. It was great. We almost had like 2 Purims this year because last Sunday we had the carnival and the big festivity of Megillah Madness. Then Thursday night we had actual Purim, and Friday morning again it was Purim. And technically, actually, Purim has 2 days, and so today is actually technically the second day of Purim. If you're in a walled city or not in a walled city. But as I was celebrating Purim throughout the week, and with the preschoolers marching and parading in their costumes and everything, I see our preschool director here actually. It's a highlight of my week to be with them, is I was looking at our Grogger, that this Grogger is just one that I've sort of inherited by being a rabbi here at Bethel, and it says rabbis on it, so with an apostrophe S, so in case it ever gets lost. But there's a pencil marking on it that really jumped out to my attention. It says the name of the person who I guess made it. It's clearly a handmade. This is way before Amazon, but it gives a date. It says that February 23rd, 1975, which means that this is the 50th Purim for this Grogger, a 50th celebration of Jewish pride, of overcoming adversity, right? That it's very special, and like I was talking about with the Talit before, about a spiritual patina on it, this has seen a lot of frivolity, which we need a little bit more of in this time. So 50 years of this Grogger. So I thought I would start off by just giving us a little history of the Grogger, why we use it, where it comes from. And so I looked up a few facts. This comes from David Schwartz, who's the education director at Har Zion in Chicago. He has written an extensive history of the Grogger. So Groggers, of course, are used to blot out Haman's name. Okay, we're not going to say it every time I say Haman, but it's 54 times in the Megillah. So Haman's name is used 54 times, and we take the Grogger, and it's a big noisemaker and everything. And the reasons that we do this is because Haman is said to be a descendant from the Bible of Amalek, and he was a bad guy, Amalek. He attacked the Israelites from behind, sort of a cheating way, and it says that we're supposed to blot out Amalek. We're supposed to both never forget him and to forget him at the same time, and so we blot out Haman's name. Now, the first evidence of the custom comes from the French commentator Rashi in the 11th century, and according to Rashi, that people would make noise to drown out Haman and his wife, Zeresh's name, in songs and poems after the Megillah reading in the 11th century. Okay. In the 12th century, the Tosafot, who are Rashi's grandkids actually, they said that they interpreted blotting out Amalek even from wood and stones, and so they would take wood and clap it together, or write Haman's name on stones and take the rocks and beat it together. In the 1200s, children in France and Provence used to write Haman's name on smooth stones from streams and smash it together. Another custom was to write Haman's name in chalk on the bottom of your shoe, and then when you would say Haman's name, you would stomp your feet. And that was a custom that took place. And then in the 1300s, Jews would break clay pots and bang on tables with their hands and sticks during the Megillah reading. In the 1500s, the Shulchan Aruch tells us that kids banging pieces of wood and stone, as we had talked about earlier, both when it was and wasn't the Megillah reading. So it's moving into actually the Megillah reading, that we make noise when we hear his name. And in the 1600s, in Northern Europe, people would use firecrackers. And when gunpowder sort of became available in Europe, they would use firecrackers in Poland and Lithuania, Romania, Russia, Germany, all those areas. And actually, there's stories that in the 1930s in Tel Aviv, during Purim, that they also would use firecrackers as well. But the modern Grogger, like this thing, started in ancient Greece and was adopted by the Romans for their ceremonies. But these practices came together. And in 1638, there's a report that Boston organized its first police force. This has nothing to do with Judaism. It's just this noisemaker. And they called it the Rattle Watch, which were the police officers that stood guard at night. And groggers, if you will, were used to sound alarms because they were small and made lots of noise. So the police in 1630s in Boston would use these things just to make an alert, a warning. And New York City quickly adopted it in the 1650s and until the pea whistle was invented in 1883. We had a lot of good history here that will get you nowhere. It will, right? Then actually the Grogger, again, not Jewish, but the Grogger was used by the US military in World War I and II to warn of poison gas attacks when one was already wearing a gas mask so that you would hear it, because again, it was small and easy to use. So the first known evidence of a Grogger being used on Purim, right? Now the convergence of a Grogger and Purim coming together was in the 1700s in Europe and in New York, he said. But the Spanish and Portuguese Jewish tradition thought Groggers were a breach of decorum, so they didn't use them because it just wasn't proper enough. But there's a paradox about this. And the paradox is that the obligation is to hear every word of the Megillah. It is to hear Haman's name and then to make the noise to blot it out. It's hard to be obligated to hear something and to not hear something at the same time. So it's a paradox. We have to hear Haman, who had the plot to destroy the Jews of Shushan, and yet then we need to blot out his name. So I've been thinking deeply about this, about hearing and then blotting out things that are offensive, even things that are dangerous to us, as Haman was dangerous to us. That first we have to hear Haman's name and then we blot it out. But the sequencing is important. So Maimonides says that we must hear every word, and that's the paradox. But how does this apply today? Why am I interested in the history of the Grogger and even this sequencing? Why am I worried about how that we must hear what is objectionable to us, even if it's objectionable? Well, when the Nazis marched in Skokie in March of 1977, right, it got all the way up to the Supreme Court. They said that the Nazis could march because of free speech. Right. Skokie had over 40,000 Jews. Thousands of them were Holocaust survivors. That was why the Nazis chose to march in Skokie. And yet, despite it being horrendous speech, deplorable speech, the Supreme Court said it was protected speech. So horrendous, offensive speech on college campuses that are taking place that I feel threatened by. And while colleges, so many of them handled it wrong, they could have used their own standards of conduct to guide legitimate protest and to quell intimidation. And too many of them did not. But as much as I deplore that speech, it is still allowed. Right? As much as I deplore river to the sea, Or other chants 2, 4, 6, 8, Israel is a terror state, I have to tell you, there's a website that has all of these slogans that you can look. So the idea that these protests are just organically popping up is not true. But the government doesn't get to throw someone out of the country who is here legally as a permanent resident just because they say something that I deeply deplore. Right? So Mohammed Khalil has not been charged or convicted of any crimes at all, unfortunately, in my opinion. That there was plenty on the college campuses that could have been used against him, but it wasn't. And he has said things that I despise, but courts need to decide if speech alone is enough to have you thrown out of the country. And I am not an expert in legal issues. It is not my training. I am not making comments on the merits of Mohammed Khalil's case or the second person that was just detained yesterday at Columbia University. But I am teaching that Judaism, we hear speech that talks about killing Jews, and then we blot it out. But that we as Jews don't stop Haman from speaking in the text of the Megillah. We don't take him out. Every year we encounter him again and again and again. So I'm teaching that Judaism, we hear speech that talks about killing Jews even. And then we respond. We despise Haman and the plot that he had against us. But we do not excise him from the text. But why do I care? Why do I really care about this? After all, Khalil wants Israel destroyed. He, I think, would want me killed as well. He is not a nice guy but I don't know him personally. Well, because if the levers of government can be brought against speech alone, I fear for other groups or causes. When I speak about Judaism's support of reproductive choice, when I speak about loving whoever you love, when we support other faith groups in the area, the Baha'i or the Hindu or other faith groups in partnership, what if I teach that Shabbat is on Saturday and not on Sunday? I mean, this is the famous Martin Niemöller poem, right? First they came for the communists and I didn't speak out because I was not a communist. And the poem goes on that then they came for the socialists, then they came for the trade unionists, then they came for the Jews. He says, then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak out for me. So I'm not overly sympathetic to Mohammed Khalil. What he says and advocates is vile, and I believe he wants Israel and my destruction. But the First Amendment contains freedoms of expression and freedom to the exercise of religion and of speech and of press and of assembly and of petitioning the government, all of which I believe are being challenged in the past 7 weeks. Maybe it's time for us to reclaim the Grogger, not only to blot out Haman, but also as a tool to sound alarm, to sound concern, and the awareness of danger. Purim's paradox is that we must confront Haman's plot. We must hear it, announce it to all through the reading of the Megillah, and then symbolically blot out Haman's name. The Grogger is also a warning of danger. And so this year, I need some of the courage of Vashti and of Esther. I need some of the awareness of Mordecai. For 50 years, this Grogger has sounded in our community. And I'm thinking about the sounds of blotting and of warning and of pride that we may need to hear in the year to come. Shabbat Shalom.